Have you ever been playing a wrestling game and thought, this is fun and all, but I just really want to wrestle using my Xbox 360 avatar? Well, oh boy, do I have a game for you, 2012's Fire Pro Wrestling. And I mean, it's a game alright. Fire Pro Wrestling was an Xbox Live Arcade title that released on September 21st, 2012 to barely any reception at all. The game was based off the long-running Japanese wrestling game series Fire Pro Wrestling that began all the way back in 1989. Don't let this game's name fool you though, because it has absolutely no connection to those games whatsoever. The only similarities this game has in common with the other games in the series is some of the gameplay mechanics. Other than that, this game is just Fire Pro Wrestling in name alone and nothing more. Fire Pro Wrestling on Xbox 360 was published by Microsoft and developed by the actual developers of the series, Spike Chunsoft, who still develop the Fire Pro Wrestling games today. Now, this game has always confused me because out of all the IPs for Microsoft want to use for a game that utilizes 360 avatars, why Fire Pro Wrestling? The Fire Pro Wrestling series of games were primarily exclusive to Japan a lot of the time. Sure, the games were released in the US before this, but up until 2012, we only really got a handful of games over here. The Fire Pro Wrestling games never even saw releases on Xbox up until this game. So unless you had a PS2 or a Game Boy Advance before you had an Xbox 360, chances are you had never even played or heard of Fire Pro Wrestling. What makes it worse is that even after playing this game, you'd still have no idea what Fire Pro Wrestling is all about. Probably a good thing nobody played it then, because this game is not very good. Making this game exclusive to the 360 is one of the weirdest decisions they could have made with this game, but Microsoft probably just wanted to get at least one Fire Pro Wrestling game on Xbox just to see if the games would work on the platform. What killed this game though was the use of avatars. Now look, I love the Xbox Live Arcade avatar games. Doritos Crash Course is still a blast to play nowadays, but this game just didn't need to be one of those. What makes the Fire Pro Wrestling games so unique is that they utilize 2D sprites and 3D environments. This game, however, just goes full 3D and ditches everything that the series is known for. Sure, playing as your 360 avatar is cool, but that doesn't change the fact that this just isn't Fire Pro Wrestling. So why is it called Fire Pro Wrestling? Anyways, with all that out of the way, I think it's time we finally dive in and take a look at the long forgotten Fire Pro Wrestling for the Xbox 360. The gameplay of Fire Pro Wrestling tries to be like the gameplay of the actual Fire Pro Wrestling games, but instead it ends up just feeling extremely limited and gets boring after a while. The gameplay for the most part just boils down to spam X and hit a combo, press A for a strong attack, and hold Y for a charge attack. Now yes, that's also how the gameplay works in the actual Fire Pro Wrestling games, but at least in those games, it's fun and engaging. With this game, it's just boring. There is nothing to keep you engaged when it comes to the gameplay. The gameplay does absolutely nothing to make wrestling in this game feel fun in any shape or form. There are finishers and different moves you can unlock, which is cool I guess, but the gameplay is so unbelievably boring that even unlocking new moves isn't enough to keep me playing the game. It really sucks because you can see Spike legitimately wanted to make this game as fun as possible. There are moments like when you're hitting a finisher and get to watch your character jump off the top rope and fly through the air where the game actually feels fun for a little bit. Then the finisher ends and you wonder why you even spent $10 on this game to begin with. Now I really wish I could say more about the gameplay, but that's about all there is to talk about. It's a very basic wrestling game in nature, and the only thing it really has to represent the Fire Pro Wrestling series is the time grapple system that the series is famous for. Now as I said at the beginning of the video, the primary focus of the game is being able to use your Xbox 360 avatar as a wrestler, and while I did just rag on the game for doing that earlier, I will say that the avatars do add a bit of charm to the game and prevent it from being total garbage at times. When you make your entrance in this game, you actually have your avatar prop with you, which is the coolest thing ever. Speaking of the entrances, I really do like them in this game. As I said, the use of the avatars add a lot of charm to the game, and that goes with the entrances as well. If the entirety of the game was just the entrances and the entrances alone, I'm pretty sure I'd like it more. Moving Moving past the entrances, it's honestly just awesome being able to wrestle as your Xbox avatar. And if this game wasn't trying to present itself as if it was just another Fire Pro Wrestling game, I honestly wouldn't mind the avatar stuff. I really do think this game could have been as big as Doritos Crash Course had it not been attached to the Fire Pro Wrestling name. I mean, the opening movie that plays before the game starts does a great job at making the game look fun and exciting, only for the rest of the game to fall short in almost every aspect. Now, because this is a wrestling game, there is of course an exhibition mode where you can pick from a selection of match types and play as many matches as you want. It's just a shame there's hardly any match types to pick from. Look, I get this game is supposed to be more of an arcade style wrestling game, but even the actual Fire Pro Wrestling gives you more options for match types. We do at least get a battle royal, which is nice, but other than that, there's a noticeable lack in variety, which makes for a pretty repetitive experience. I mean, tag and 2-on-2 are literally just the same thing, with 2-on-2 just being a tornado tag rather than a traditional tag match. So if you eliminate those, the only unique match types you're left with are single, fatal 4-way, and as I mentioned a little bit ago, a battle royal. No triple threat for some reason, but whatever, the game sucks, so who the hell cares? While there's hardly any variety in the match types, there is at least some variety in the arena selection. In total, there's 9 arenas to choose from, and you know what? They're all pretty solid. All of them have these really cool backdrops and set pieces that genuinely improve the look of them. The only problem is that the arenas are cool to look at for maybe 5 minutes before they become dull and stale. Even the amusement park arena, which while it is my favorite out of all the arenas playable here, just isn't all that interesting after a while of playing on it. Some of the other arenas include a building, a gym, a pretty cool looking Chinatown arena, and of course, an actual arena. There's nothing inherently wrong with the arenas themselves. They work fine enough, but there's just something about them that makes them feel half-baked. Kind of like the whole game. With how much this game lacks in content, I'm honestly surprised as a character selection, let alone characters to choose from. Speaking of the characters, let's talk about them because these are the most bland and uninteresting wrestlers I've ever seen. Firestar looks pretty cool, but Aching Anthony looks like he's ready to keel over and die, and what the fuck kind of name is Toy Boy? Along with the original characters that were made for this game, you of course have the option to use your own Xbox 360 avatar, which is what I always end up doing, as I don't give a single fuck about these other characters. Matter of fact, I straight up just don't like this game. As much as I enjoy playing on the arenas for the first 5 minutes, and as much as I love the use of avatars in this game, everything else in this game is just not very good. The characters are boring, there's hardly any match types, and after the first hour, it ends up just being repetitive and not fun. Maybe if you had a few friends to play this with, it could be fun, but would you really put your friends through this? There is a locker room where you can customize your character's costume and entrance theme, but honestly, it's really nothing special. It's fine, but it's nothing that I would consider game changing. There's quite a bit of moves you can give your character as well, but it really doesn't matter since the moves themselves lack any sort of impact when hitting them on your opponent. That's honestly my biggest problem with this game, is that a lot of the time my attacks don't feel like they register at all. This is a wrestling game where the core mechanic of wrestling is so broken that it actually doesn't function at all. How do you make a wrestling game where the wrestling doesn't work? I think what's even worse is that this game came out 2 years after Doritos Crash Course, and yes, I'm talking about Doritos Crash Course again. Doritos Crash Course was by far the perfect example of how to make a proper Avatar game, seeing as it had various levels, all of which being equally fun and well thought out, as well as it just being infinitely replayable. And rather than taking elements from that, Fire Pro Wrestling just ends up feeling like a shell of what it could have been. If this would have just been an Avatar wrestling game without the Fire Pro Wrestling name attached to it and had a bit more thought and work put into it, it very well could have been a huge success. Instead, it ended up failing and as a result fell into obscurity. Well, since I've talked about the gameplay, there's one more mode we have to get to, the campaign. You want to know how to make a terrible campaign? Well, first look at Call of Duty Vanguard, and then look at Fire Pro Wrestling. The campaign, if you can even call it that, essentially just sees you playing through a number of matches, working your way up the ranks to becoming champion. Yeah, I wish I could say the campaign was the saving grace of this game, but no, this game literally has nothing in it that makes it worth playing. Well, Shadow, I think you're just being too harsh. The game can't be that bad. My game crashed multiple times when playing through the campaign. The game doesn't even work. works, so I'm not being too harsh. The game deserves all the criticism I'm throwing at it, especially when you consider the fact that it was a $10 game, and despite that, it still had the nerve to offer a paid DLC pack for $5 more. Are you All in all, Fire Pro Wrestling on the Xbox 360 is not a good game. It's nowhere near similar enough to the actual Fire Pro Wrestling games to warrant it being called that, and its gameplay is just not very good. If you played this game, I'm truly sorry, and if you're planning on playing it, don't.